Shalom, welcome to Israel 365 News. I'm your host, David Sidman, here with the world's most prolific biblical journalist, Eliyahu Berkowitz. Eliyahu, say shalom to the audience.
Shalom from the Golan.
Okay, let's get right to it. In a highly controversial ruling, Israel's most respected Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky decreed that yeshiva, or religious ceremony students, should refuse coronavirus testing. The announcement comes at a highly sensitive time as a record spike in coronavirus hits Israel, totaling over 3,000 cases in just 24 hours. Could this be the beginning of a bigger schism between the government regulations and God-fearing Jews who no longer trust them? What do you have to say about this, Eliyahu?
I think Rav Kanievsky is entirely correct. The science has been scattered all over the place. No one has really established rules. The rules go back on them. I totally trust his motives. His intention is for the good of the world.
Well, a lot of people are saying that it's actually not Rabbi Kanievsky who's saying it. They're saying that his advisors and the people who are surrounding him are feeding him bad information. And what's interesting, and do you agree with that, or do you disagree, or is that one of those things we'll just never know the answer to?
That's a little difficult to understand. There's definitely an inner circle, and I've seen cases where I question the rulings and where they come from, and it's awfully bad when religion gets politicized. But for the time being, since the government is working off of bad information and has misled us so many times, I think this is I definitely trust him in this respect.
Well, what's important to note is the reason why he's telling his students not to test for COVID. And the reason is because he calls it what's called a bitul Torah, which means a Jew should be spending his time studying the Bible. And if you get tested for coronavirus and it comes out positive, then what happens is you have to stay at home for 2 weeks. And according to Rabbi Kanievsky, this is a waste of time that could be better spent learning Torah. What do you think about that decree that he made for his students?
I think actually, yeah, his students learning Torah. If you believe that Bible study has a value, it certainly adds something to the world. And I've seen it with my own experience. Is that yes, it works. The 1 + 1 = 2. We say 1 + 1, God willing, equals 2. There's a nice. There's definitely an additional element of spirituality, divinity in this plague.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because it's kind of like what's more important, testing for a virus that doesn't really affect young men in this yeshiva, or studying the Word of God. And it seems like this is kind of a microcosm of the battle of science and Torah, that it doesn't necessarily have to be a battle, or should I say, the battle of bad science and Torah, meaning we've been misled. The statistics are completely unreliable about coronavirus. They've been scaring us for months that we're going to kill grandma. And it's pretty obvious to everyone that young men just out of high school, who we're talking about here, aren't so susceptible to coronavirus like our grandmas are. And so the question is, what's more important?
That's a huge point.
The fringe, rare, minuscule possibility that a young man who's 19 years old will catch coronavirus, and if he does, he probably won't show any symptoms, or studying the Torah.
That's a huge point, and it's a point at which the religious community can be leaders to take a lot of misinformation that's been fed to the secular community, where they've shut down the entire school system, when really the kids should be going to school, but you should take into it. But meanwhile, you have like New York, where they forced old people to go back into old age homes. I believe that accounted for 40% of all the deaths in America. And for young people to go to school, it's definitely the science says that they should go to school.
Yeah, it's true. And especially if in school they're learning, the Torah and the Word of God and important things like
even more so. This is us being a light unto the nations. I think that's very clearly the case.
Totally. All right, so let's get to the next story. In what some are calling divine retribution, just months after The Hague made the decision to investigate Israel for war crimes, President Trump dropped the hammer, slapping sanctions on ICC Chief Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda and Fasiko Mochokuko. I hope I'm saying those names right. Head of the Hague's court jurisdiction, complementarily in cooperation division. They were sanctioned for the court's illegitimate attempts to subject Americans to its jurisdiction. So what basically happened was they investigated Israel for war crimes. And, they said to themselves, we're on a roll. Let's investigate U.S. troops for war crimes in Afghanistan. And at that point, Trump was like, you did this to the wrong president. And now he's sanctioning them.
I think there's a really huge point here, which is appointing leaders is not just a power game. It's given in the Torah because leaders are they are the intermediary between us and God. There's an aspect of the community coming together, which is divine. And if you pick bad people, then you've got a bad connection with God. And the UN has really gone off the deep end with this. This woman was a prosecutor in Gambia for evil regimes. She was the one who was putting people, saying this person gets tortured, this person gets put away. She is not in any way a holy judge. I also want to point out that, and we saw this even with the WHO, the World Health Organization. The leader of the World Health Organization was very heavily criticized when in his own country, and yet they chose him to run the entire fight against the pandemic. I also want to point out that when you stand with Israel, you better get ready to catch some flack. Trump is really standing with us. Obama was praised by the entire world, and he was going to be a leader of the UN because the UN is a rotten institution. Here we have Trump. He's really doing the right thing. He does the right thing. So of course he's going to get shot at by the UN. Of course he's going to catch the same flack as Israel. The UN used to battle just against Israel. Now America is included in that.
Okay. Democratic hopeful Joe Biden is set to meet with the father of Jacob Blake, whose anti-Semitic social media posts have raised a lot of eyebrows. Will the meeting prompt lifelong Jewish Democrats to think twice come November? Now, Eliyahu, before I get to your response, I just want to read to you some of Jacob Blake Sr.'s Facebook posts. Now, of course, Jacob Blake is the black man who was shot, I think, 9 times by police last week in Kenosha.
No, they shot 7 bullets, 4 of them hit him.
Okay. So Trump turned down the opportunity to meet with his father. Joe Biden is actually meeting with him. And I'm going to read you a few Facebook posts from Jacob Blake Sr., Jacob Blake Jr.'s father. The Jewish media picks and chooses who is a terrorist and who is not. The same pink-toed Jewish people that control the the same pink-toed Jewish people that control the interest rate control the media. They control minds and money. The first Jews were brown, not pink, damn it. White Jews want you to believe there are no brown Jews, and white Jews know the truth. The brown Jews was first. What do you have to say about that?
Well, first of all, there's still brown Jews. There's still Negro Jews, African Jews. There's Chinese Jews. There's Jews of every color. It's really a question of what your soul is, and not a question of your color. So in that respect, he's wrong. Also, every discrimination has its particular characteristic. With Jews, it's kind of funny. They say amazing things about us that would be a huge compliment if they didn't intend it in a bad way. Jews run the world. Well, isn't that a good thing? If you say, we're Jews have all the money, is that bad? There is a kind of racism. Each racism has its own particular aspect to it.
Well, I think what's interesting is that Biden has agreed to meet with this guy knowing that he's essentially a black version of David Duke.
Yeah.
And this is the guy who so many Jews are going to be voting for. This is the Democrat. This is the guy who really needs to, he already has a racism problem. What did he say? That if you don't know if you're going to vote for me or Trump, you're not black. And now he's
if you don't vote Democrat, you ain't black. Biden has always.
The black guy he's finally meeting with is saying that, Jews control the interest rates, the internet, and all the money. Pretty
Well,
amazing.
also, I am certainly not an Islamophobe. I have nothing against Islam or against Muslims. Um, we teach that Torah can be a drug for life or a drug for death, and I think the same is true of any spirituality. He is a Muslim. He last week when he did a media event where he read out from the Quran, and I'm really blessed to be able to speak to Dr. Mordechai Kedar. When you talk about religion, there has to do a lot of unpacking. There are messages underneath things that are said. And he read a passage from the Quran. It's something that you do say when people need healing. He was saying it ostensibly for the healing of his son. But the last verse of it, it said, the way of those on whom you have bestowed your grace, not the way of those who have earned your anger, nor of those who went astray. So the ones who have earned your anger, that is the Jews, and the ones who went astray, those are the Christians. That's how Islam sees it. And when I asked Dr. Kedar about it, he said, well, it's not a verse where they're calling for jihad, but Islam is replacement theology. And that is the way they view Christianity and Judaism. They view Judaism as a reason for Allah to be angry, and they view Christians as people who have gone astray from the true religion. So that was explicit in the verses he read. And what's interesting is not so long ago, Joe Biden spoke to a Muslim group, and he said these verses in the Quran that also had a hidden message that when it was unpacked, he was actually saying we need jihad. Though Joe Biden would certainly never call for jihad, I don't believe. As Dr. Kedar said, when whoever gave him that verse to read, who knew about Islam, they were thinking the message given to all of Islam was, oh, Joe Biden is going to be a very useful idiot for us. That's exactly what Dr. Kedar said. I was on the floor. So there are implicit messages that are understood to every Muslim. Jacob Blake gave them. It is not surprising that he is anti-Semitic. It was implicit in the verses. Anti-Semitism was implicit in the verses of the Quran that he read. So this is his methodology.
Okay, and in archaeological news, archaeologists have uncovered a rare palace from the era of the Judean kings. The castle is estimated to have been in use between the reign of King Hezekiah and King Josiah. So another really cool archaeological find, possibly the palace of King Josiah was just discovered in Jerusalem.
You gotta love it. You gotta love it. I remember Dr. Mizart, she found Eilat Mizart, she found a seal for a jug, and it was supposed to be, she thought it might have been from, I think it was Hezekiah, from one of the prophets, and it had a thumbprint. And I remember thinking to myself, that could be a prophet's thumbprint. When you're dealing with archaeology in Israel, you're going to run across stuff like this. Kings from the Bible. Thank God. Thank God. We're living to see it.
And finally, French President Emmanuel Macron, during a trip in Lebanon, lost his cool after confronting a reporter who exposed his secret meeting with a top Hezbollah leader, Mahmoud Saad. So I actually reported a few months ago in April about a secret deal between France and Hezbollah, where France actually gave 4 frigate battleships to Hezbollah. Pretty crazy when you think of that. France is directly, it's not just that they're funding Hezbollah, they're actually giving them weapons that will probably be used against Israel. It's hard to
not just against Israel. Not just against Israel. That's the problem. Not just against Israel. Things are when you talk about Gog and Magog, it used to be. It's funny. We take the concept of a world war for granted, but in the times of the Bible, there was no such thing as a world war. It was even tribal, and the fact that a whole country could get together was unusual. That was the power of Rome, that they were an entire country. But what we're seeing is the world is once again aligning. So it's not just, oh, Hezbollah hates Israel. No, we're seeing an aligning of two major axes, and
Yeah,
and
it's
it's
Esav
it's
and Ishmael, if you want.
Gog
If
and
you would.
Magog, Esav and Ishmael
Wow.
aspect of it. So Macron, nice guy, whatever. The question is, where
I
do
don't
we
think he's
see?
a nice guy.
Okay, he's not a nice guy. I was trying to be a little okay, but it's not so simple to say
Macron
Hezbollah
is
bad.
the guy who yelled at the Israeli police in Israel when they didn't want him to enter the tomb of
Mm,
Helenia Malka, a Jewish woman, with all his security entourage. I mean, who does he think he is? Screaming at tongue lashing Israeli police in Jerusalem? He's not a nice. He's actually one of the more evil leaders of Europe, in my opinion.
that's very interesting. I have not really been so aware of Macron and that side of him, and now that you're saying it, I'm certainly going to be keeping an eye on it and seeing where things line up. Because yeah, there's to a normal person aligning with Hezbollah would be no way, clearly no. But for Macron, apparently he would be able to justify aligning with Hezbollah. Turkey is aligned with Hamas. Turkey is in NATO. We're seeing people line up. I found out that the Paris Accords had a lot to do with the China One Belt, One Road deal, which is globe threatening. So there are sides lining up, and not everyone is logical. Not everyone. I call it University of the Death Star, where people can make what seem like very logical decisions to do really horrible things. And that might be what he's doing here.
Okay, thank you very much, Eliyahu Berkowitz. Coming up next, we have Rabbi Tuli Wise, who's going to interview the former ambassador to Washington, Michael Oren. But first, a quick commercial break. Shalom from Israel.
The prophet Isaiah says in chapter 40, "Comfort, comfort my people, O Israel." And friends, we have a special opportunity to not only comfort the people of Israel, but to comfort the Holocaust survivors whose health is failing and their needs are increasing. And please, please, I implore you to partner with Israel 365 in order to provide comfort to the Holocaust survivors in Israel today.
Good to be with you. Shalom.
Shalom. So it's amazing how accomplished you are. You're so well known and beloved here in Israel as a historian, as a diplomat, as the former ambassador, and now you're a fiction writer. You just came out with a new book of fiction, short stories, called The Night Archer and Other Stories. And
Here it is.
oh, it's upside down.
I turned it upside down. How about that one? Talk about being dyslexic, huh?
So everybody could get it on Amazon, of course, and Barnes and Nobles. So, we work with Christians, and a lot of our viewers today are non-Jews who love Israel, and I'm always encouraging them to study the history of Israel. If you want to really understand the Jewish people, you have to understand our history. And you, of course, have written many books of history. And I'm sure so many of our readers have read your book on the Six-Day War, or your book about the power, faith, and fantasy and America's relationship with Israel and the Middle East from 1776. But what would you say about non-Jews reading Jewish fiction? Is that as worthwhile? What would you say about that?
Well, much of my fiction deals with the question of faith. I'm a person of faith. What's less known about my career is that I served as the advisor on church affairs for Yitzhak Rabin. I know every church in this country and every church movement and every sect in this country. I know my New Testament very, very well, to quote it even, and find it to be a very Jewish book for the most part, with Jewish prayers and Hebrew, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, and that's my language. And so very close to that. So there are stories in this collection, in The Night Archer, which deal with faith. which deal with God, which deal with Satan, with evil, with the nature of the human soul. There's one, I think, very powerful story. It's interesting. It's a story that's been very popular among my Orthodox Jewish readership. It's a story about a pastor in a church he and his family are grappling with a deep moral question. And it raises serious questions about whether morality can be impacted by current events and the degree to which it is malleable, can change over time. So there's much to find in these stories, even though it is by a Jewish press, by a Jewish author, but it's by a Jewish author who has a deep sensibility about Christianity, deep knowledge about Christianity, and has interacted with Christians across the field, but especially with the evangelical community.
So as the former ambassador of Israel to the United States, it seems like we're living in really interesting times with the recent peace treaty between Israel, or the normalization with the UAE, but also very critical times, especially as America heads towards an election. And what I think was surprising to many people, many of your followers, was how after you left Washington, you came out pretty strong against the Obama administration with an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about how Obama abandoned Israel, and in talking after President Trump was here in 2017, you talked about how his love for Israel and the Jewish people was so palpable. You mentioned that in one of your talks. So I'm wondering how you feel about the election going as we get closer. Are you nervous about the outcome of the election? Because it seems like Israel has become a very dicey issue.
It has indeed. Whatever happened to bipartisan support? I'll be very frank with you. I know former Vice President Biden very well. I know former Senator Harris very well. Both of them are pro-Israel. Both of them are committed to the U.S.-Israel strategic alliance. They will not use U.S. aid as a way of sort of arm twisting Israel. But the fact remains, we have policy differences with them. We'll have policy differences over the Palestinian issue. They will probably reject the Trump peace plan, which I think is the best peace plan we've ever seen. And I've been in this game, as you know, for 30 years. It will probably restore U.S. aid to Palestinian. Pardon me? They'll probably restore U.S. aid to UNRWA and other corrupt Palestinian agencies. Mm-hmm. They will probably not move the embassy back, but we're going to have problems on the Palestinian issue and on the settlement issue. They'll oppose Israel's building in Judea and Samaria and in Jerusalem. The biggest policy difference, though, will be about Iran. And both Biden and Senator Harris have come out and said that they will restore the U.S. agreement with Iran, the nuclear deal, which we view as a strategic threat, as a threat to my children and grandchildren. And that's a very serious difference between us. So without getting involved in the U.S. elections, I would exhort and beseech the Democrats not to renew that agreement and not to forfeit the great progress that has been made on the peace front by not focusing on settlements and not focusing on the Palestinians. To take if they win, if the Democrats win in November, and I don't know, I'm not a prophet, I'm a historian, I have problems predicting the past. I would urge them to take the diplomatic equivalent of the oath that doctors take, the Hippocratic Oath, and say, first of all, do no harm. Right. Do not bring the United States back into that nuclear agreement. Do not jettison the Trump peace plan. Do not try to interfere with the growing relationship between Israel and the Arab world.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ambassador Oren. And once again, it's The Night Archer and Other Stories available on Amazon.
Holding it up right this time.
And Barnes & Nobles. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shalom. Be well. Let's go.
Hi, this is Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz saying goodbye to you from the Holy Land. And this has been a blinding light coming out of Zion. Thank you for joining us. Be blessed, y'all.